नेता टाइप आधा काम मत करो, सब्सक्राइब के साथ साथ बेल आइकॉन भी दबाओ।
Hello aspirants, welcome to UPSC Civil Services Simplified. So far so good. We have studied the disintegration of Soviet Union leading to a rise of a sole superpower, that is USA. Now in today's chapter we'll study that to conquer or to counterbalance the USA's superpower, there rose two contemporary power bodies, that was the European Union and the ASEAN. Also, in the later part of the chapter, we will see the rise of China and how China counterbalances with the USA as a superpower. So let's start. Our area of discussion would be the European Union, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, that is ASEAN, the rise of Chinese economy, India-China relations. Let's start. The European Union. As the Second World War came to an end, many of the European leaders grappled with the question of Europe. So when Second World War came to an end with the defeat of Germany, so now it was time for European leaders to think what to do with Europe. Should Europe be allowed to revert to its old rivalries or be constructed on principles and institutions that would contribute to a positive conceptions of international relations? So they were grappled with the question that should they get together with USA, who was their enemy, or they should form their own alliance type of system, or they should form their own group. So this was the type of question that was coming into their minds of the European leaders. So the Second World War shattered many of the assumptions and structures on which the European states had based their relations. So as they lost the war, the Second World War, and with the loss of war, the consequences of war, as I have told in the previous lectures also, that the consequences of war are never good. The consequences of war is destruction of economy, destruction of humanity, society, etc. And thus Europe was no exception in this case. In 1945, the European states confronted the ruin of their economies and the destruction of their assumptions and structures on which Europe had been founded. So entire Europe was destroyed economically because they had lost the war. So because they had lost the war, so their economy was destroyed, and now those pillars on which Europe was built had a crack in it. So it was like at any particular or given point of time, Europe could collapse on economic front. So this, you can see, this was Europe at the time of 1945, the Second World War. These all countries are there, with Germany taking much of the portion of land, and also Germany was one of the most powerful centers during Second World War. But with the defeat, the entire Europe was shaken. So European integration after 1945 was aided by the Cold War. So after the destruction of their economy came the Cold War. Now they had question to come with any of the alliances, either of the parts of the world, that is first part or the second part, or the first world or the second world, that is USA and USSR. America extended massive financial help for reviving Europe's economy under what was called the Marshall Plan. So America thought that they could take this as an advantage and they can bring the Europe into their dominance or into their part. Otherwise they knew that Soviet would convince them and take them into their part. So America, because they had been destroyed economically, so America started giving huge financial help to European countries, so that you take these funds and develop your economy once again. And this plan of America giving financial help and aid came to be known as the Marshall Plan. The US also created a new collective security structure under NATO. So North Atlantic Treaty Organization, they also formed a structure under NATO which would act as a collective security for European countries. Under the Marshall Plan, the Organization for European Economic Cooperation, OEEC, was established in 1948 to channel aid to the West European states. It became a forum where the Western European states began to cooperate on trade and economic issues. So Eastern European part was taken by the Soviet. Eastern European states were with the Soviet Union, as Soviet Union had convinced them that you come into especially the parts of Ukraine and these countries. But if we talk about the Western Europe parts, they came with the America, because America provided them financial help. Also America established an organization which is known as European Economic Cooperation. So they formed and through this platform, through this organization, they channelized aid to the Western European states, and they started cooperating on trade and economic issues. So once you build your trade and economic, you can revive your economy and build your economy of your country once again. The Council of Europe, established in 1949, was another step forward in political cooperation. The process of economic integration of European capitalist countries proceeded step by step, leading to the formation of European Economic Community in 1957. So various other communities were formed by US. The main purpose of forming those community was to build Europe. And why USA was taking so much part in Western Europe? Because they were their ally countries, they were with them, and thus USA wanted them to be with them, and the main function of US was to build their country economically through giving financial aids. So these all organizations which were built by USA were the platform through which the communication or the transaction of financial aid could take place. Now we will see the timeline of the European integration. In 1951 April, 6 West European countries, France, West Germany, Italy, Belgium, Netherlands and Luxembourg, signed the Treaty of Paris, establishing the European Coal and Steel Community, ECSC. So these 6 countries came together. They all were European countries obviously, and they came together and signed the Treaty of Paris and formed an organization that was known as European Coal and Steel Community. Then in 1957 March 25, these 6 countries signed the Treaty of Rome, establishing the European Economic Community, EEC, and the European Economic Community, EEC, and the European Atomic Energy Community, Euratom. So they formed first they formed on the coal and steel front, and after that in 1957 they came together and built for the European Economic Community and European Atomic Energy Community. Sorry, I have written this European Economic Community 2 times. European Economic Community and European Atomic Energy Community. So on economic front as well as an atomic front, all these 6 countries came together. In 1973 January, Denmark, Ireland and United Kingdom joined the European Community. So now from 6 they moved to 9. So 3 more countries came together and joined the European Community. In 1979, first direct elections to the European Parliament. So first elections were held in the European Parliament. In 1981, Greece joins the European Union. In 1981, Greece joins the European Union. 1985, the Schengen Agreement abolishes border controls amongst the European Union members. So Schengen Agreement, it abolishes border controls. So there were no more border controls. So I have to give swift to trade and commerce of that particular area or of particular members. In 1986, Spain and Portugal joins the European Community. In 1990, unification of Germany. So the division of Germany that took place during the Second World War and after the Cold War, it got united in 1990. In 1992, the Treaty of Maastricht was signed, establishing the European Union. So the Treaty of Maastricht was signed, which established the European Union. So European Community, earlier it was European Community, but with the Treaty of Maastricht, it became to Europe. It converted into European Union. Then in 1993 January, the single market was created. So one single market was created means that entire region which was under the European Union or and all the countries that were there in the European Union will be considered as one single market. So any outside body who has to trade with European countries, they'll have to trade with European Union, then they can enter into trade with those countries, either of those countries or all of those countries. Means they were created as a single market rather than different countries, different market, one market. So if you have to trade with any of the countries, you have to trade with European Union, not with any of the countries. In 1995, Austria, Finland and Sweden joins the European Union. In 2000, Germany, Euro, the new currency, was introduced in the 12 European Union members. So European Union, they formed their own new currency. Despite their countries having different currencies, they'll have a common currency which will be known as Euro. In 2004, May, the new members Cyprus, the Czech Republic, Estonia, Hungary, Latvia, Lithuania, Malta, Poland, Slovakia and Slovenia joins the European Union. So these countries joined the European Union in 2004 May. In 2007, Bulgaria and Romania joins the European Union. Slovenia adopts the euro. So although some countries they were having, like, if you want you can adopt euro system, or if you don't want you can have your own currency also, but all countries agreed to that. But Bulgaria and Romania joins the European Union, and then Slovenia adopts the euro. Slovenia didn't adopt the euro in the first instance. That was in 2004. So these processes acquired a political dimension with the creation of the European Parliament. The collapse of the Soviet bloc put Europe on a fast track and resulted in the establishment of the European Union in 1992. So when with the disintegration of Soviet Union, the Eastern Europe countries which were dependent on Europe or which were the allies of Soviet Union, they became independent. Also the Western countries, they were also trying to get independent with themselves. So they came together and formed the European Union in 1992. The foundation was thus laid for a common foreign and security policy, cooperation on justice and home affairs, and the creation of a single currency. So main features of European Union was common foreign and security policy. All the countries that were there in European Union had a common foreign and security policy, cooperation on justice and home affairs, and creation of a single currency, that is euro. The European Union has evolved over time from an economic union to an increasingly political one. So the union that was created for economic purpose to build all the countries that were the members of European Union on the economic front now is now also having the major political dominance in the entire world. The European Union has started to act more as a nation state. So they have started as a nation state, as one nation. While the attempts to have a constitution have failed, it has its own flag, anthem, founding date and currency. So although European Union had failed to build its own constitution, which would be common for all the European countries, it has its own flag, you can see, and it is having its own anthem, Ode to Joy. The name of the anthem is Ode to Joy. The founding date, that is 1st November 1993, Maastricht, Netherlands, and the currency, that is euro, one of the most powerful currencies against dollar also. If dollar, other than dollar, euro is also one of the most powerful currency which fluctuates every other currencies of the world. It also has some form of a common foreign and security policy in its dealing with other nations. The European Union has tried to expand areas of cooperation while acquiring new members, especially from the erstwhile Soviet bloc. So they had new members which came as they were earlier the part of the Soviet Union, but then after the disintegration they came and joined the hands with the European Union. The process has now proved so easy for people in many countries are not very enthusiastic in giving the European powers and were exercised by the government of their country. There are also reservations about including some new countries with the European Union. So some countries, if they wanted to come with the European Union, they are having reservations and they are most welcomed. And also many of the so European Union is now having a greater influence in the world economy and political affairs. So if we talk about the European Union, these are countries that are highlighted are the part of European Union, and this country, United Kingdom, exited the European Union on 31st of January 2021. Withdrawal of the United Kingdom from the European Union and European Atomic Energy. So now European Union used to be a nuclear power state as well as the country which is having veto power in the UN. After its exist, there is only one country which is having the veto in UN and is a nuclear state as well, which is France. Right? So far so good. The European Union has economic, political and diplomatic and military influence. Now a union that was created for the economic prosperity is now having political, diplomatic and military influence. The European Union is the world's biggest economy with a GDP of more than $12 trillion in 2005. So this is the data of 2005. Now it is having a much more significance, slightly larger than that of the United States. So little larger than of the United States. Its currency, the euro, can pose a threat to the dominance of the US dollar. As I told you, it is against another most powerful currency, expect dollar. Its share of the world trade is 3 times larger than that of the United States, allowing it to be more assertive in trade disputes with the US and China. So it is having more powerful trade, share of world trade is more powerful than China. Its economic power gives it influence over its closest neighbors as well as in Asia and Africa. It also functions as an important bloc in international economic organizations such as the World Trade Organization. So it is having international economic forum also. It is having its influence in the WTO also. So the European Union also has political and diplomatic influence. 2 members of the European Union, Britain, which is now ex-member, and France, hold permanent seats in the UN Security Council. The European Union includes several non-permanent members of UNSC, United Nations Security Council. This has established the European Union to influence some US policies, such as the current US position on Iran's nuclear program. So now it has to adopt some of the policies of the US and have to work in accordance with the United Nations. its use of diplomacy, economic investments and negotiations rather than coercion and military force has been effective, as in the case of its dialogue with China on human rights and environmental degradation. Rather than being powerful on military front, it is more powerful on diplomatic, economic and negotiation perspective. It is having more influence on this, whereas USA is having more power on military front, right? Militarily, the US combined armed forces and is the second largest in the world, and its total spending on defense is second after the US. Two European member states, that was Britain, now ex-member, and France also have nuclear arsenals of actually 550 nuclear warheads. But now since Britain has exited, so France is the country which is having nuclear warheads. It is also the world's second most important source of space and communication technology. As a supranational power, supranational power means having power or influence that transcends national boundaries or governments. Means it can have influence on any country of the world. Its decision can have influence in any part of the world. The European Union is able to intervene in economic, political and social areas, but in many areas its member states have their own foreign relations and defense policies that are often at odds with each other. Thus, Britain's Prime Minister Tony Blair was America's partner in the Iraq invasion, and many of the European Union's newer members made up the US-led coalition of the willing, whereas Germany and France opposed America's policy. There is also a deep-seated Euroscepticism in some parts of the Europe about the European Union's integrationist agenda. Thus, for example, Britain's former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher kept the US out of the European market. Denmark and Sweden have restricted the Maastricht Treaty and the adoption of the euro, the common euro currency. This limits the ability of foreign relations and defense. So, despite European Union being having most powerful or influential power, it is breaking internally, or some of its policies are not adopted by even its own members. Now you will talk about the ASEAN. So if this is the world, we divide the world into two parts. We draw two lines, the world is divided into four parts. Now if we talk about this particular region where this red arrow is coming is known as the ASEAN countries, or Association of Southeast Asian Nations. So if we talk about these countries are Southeast, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN in short. Before and during the Second World War, this region of Asia suffered the economic and political consequences of repeated colonialisms, both European and Japanese. At the end of the war, it confronted problems of nation building, the ravages of poverty and economic backwardness, and the pressure to align with one great power or another during the Cold War. This was a recipe for conflict which the countries of South Asia could ill afford. Efforts at Asian and Third World unity, such as the Bandung Conference and the Non-Aligned Movement, were ineffective in establishing the Convention for Informal Cooperation and Interaction. Hence, the Southeast Asian nations sought an alternative by establishing the Association for Southeast Asian Nations. So rather than going with the aligning with the any part of the world, that is during the Cold War, or going with the non-aligned movement, they came together, and ASEAN was established in 1967 by 5 countries of this region: Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore and Thailand, by signing the Bangkok Declaration. So they signed these all 5 countries came up together and signed the Bangkok Declaration and thus established the common platform known as ASEAN. The objectives of ASEAN were primarily to accelerate economic growth through that social progress and cultural development. So primary objective of ASEAN was to accelerate economic growth as they were very economically backward, and second was social progress and cultural development. A second objective was to promote regional peace and stability based on the rule of law and the principles of the United Nations Charter. Over the years, Brunei Darussalam, Vietnam, Lao PDR, Myanmar, earlier Burma, and Cambodia joined ASEAN, taking its strength to 10. Unlike the European Union, there is little desire in ASEAN for supranational structures and institutions. Asian countries have celebrated what has become known as the Asian Way, a form of interaction that is informal, non-confrontationist, and cooperative. The respect for national sovereignty is crucial to the functioning of ASEAN. With some of the fastest growing economies in the world, ASEAN broadened its objectives beyond the economic and social spheres. In 2003, ASEAN moved along the path of European Union by agreeing to establish an Asian community comprising 3 pillars, namely the Asian Security Community, the Asian Economic Community, and Asian Socio-Cultural Community. The Asian Security Community was based on the conviction that outstanding territorial disputes should not escalate into armed confrontation. By 2003, ASEAN had several agreements in place by which member states promised to uphold peace, neutrality, cooperation, non-interference, and respect for national differences and sovereign rights. The Asian Regional Forum (ARF), which was established in 1994, is the organization that carries out coordination of security and foreign policy. ASEAN was and still remains principally an economic association, while the Asian region as a whole is a much smaller economy compared to the US, the European Union, and Japan. Its economy is growing much faster than all these. This accounts for the growth in its influence both in the region as well as beyond. The objectives of Asian Economic Community are to create a common market and production base within Asian states and to aid social and economic development in the region. The Economic Community would also like to improve the existing Asian dispute settlement mechanism to resolve economic disputes. ASEAN has focused on creating a free trade area for investment, labor, and services. The US and China have already moved fast to negotiate for free trade agreements with ASEAN. ASEAN is rapidly growing into a very important regional organization. Its Vision 2020 had defined an outward-looking role for ASEAN in the international community. This builds on the existing ASEAN policy to encourage negotiation over conflicts in the region. Thus, ASEAN has mediated the end of the Cambodian conflict, the East Timor crisis, and meets annually to discuss East Asian cooperation. The current economic strength of ASEAN, especially its economic relevance as a trading and investment partner to the growing Asian economies such as India and China, make this an attractive proposition. During the Cold War, Indian foreign policy did not pay adequate attention to ASEAN, but in recent years, India has tried to make amends. It signed FTAs, that is free trade agreements, with 2 Asian members, Singapore and Thailand, and is trying to sign an FTA with ASEAN itself. ASEAN's strength, however, lies in its policies of interaction and consultation with member states, with dialogue partner, and with non-regional organizations. It is the only regional association in Asia that provides a political forum where Asian countries and the major powers can discuss political and security concerns. Now we will see the rise of Chinese economy. China's economic success since 1978 has been linked to its rise as a great power. China has been the fastest growing economy since the reform first began there. It is projected to overtake the US as the world's largest economy by 2040. Its economic integration into the region makes it the driver of the East Asian growth, thereby giving it enormous influence in the regional affairs. The strength of its economy, together with other factors such as population, landmass, resources, regional location, and political influence, adds to it the power in significant ways. After the inception of the People's Republic of China in 1949, following the Communist Revolution under the leadership of Mao, its economy was based on the Soviet model. The economically backward Communist China chose to sever its links with the capitalist world. It had little choice but to fall back on its resources and for a brief period on Soviet aid and advice. The model was to create a state-owned heavy industry sector from the capital accumulated from agriculture, as it was short of foreign exchange that it needed in order to buy on technology and goods on the world market. China decided to substitute import by domestic goods. This model allowed China to use its resources to establish the foundations of an industrial economy on a scale that did not exist before. Employment and social welfare was assured to all citizens, and China moved ahead of most developing countries in educating its citizens and ensuring better health for them. The economy also grew at a respectable rate of 5 to 6%, but an annual growth of 2 to 3% in population meant that economic growth was insufficient to meet the needs of the growing population. Agriculture production was not difficult to generate a surplus for industry. The crisis that was faced by the state-controlled economy in USSR, the same was faced by China, as its industrial production was not growing fast enough, international trade was minimal, and per capita income was very low. The Chinese leadership took major decisions in the 1970s. China ended its political and economic isolation with the establishment of relations with the United States in 1972. Premier Zhou Enlai proposed the four modernizations: agriculture, industry, science and technology, and military in 1973. So they started working in four fields. By 1978, the then leader Deng Xiaoping allowed the open door policy for economic reforms in China. The policy was to generate higher productivity by investments of capital and technology from abroad. China followed its own path in introducing a market economy. The Chinese did not go for shock therapy but opened their economy step by step. The privatization of agriculture in 1982 was followed by the privatization of industry in 1998. Trade barriers were eliminated only in special economic zones (SEZ), where foreign investors could set up enterprises. In China, the state played and continues to play a central role in setting up a market economy. The new economic policy helped the Chinese economy to break from stagnation. So USSR has done this mistake, which resulted in the stagnation of their economy. Privatization of agriculture led to a remarkable rise in agricultural production and rural incomes. High personal savings in the rural economy led to an exponential growth in rural industry. The Chinese economy, including both industry and agriculture, grew at a faster rate. The new trading laws and the creation of special economic zones led to a phenomenal rise in foreign trade. China has become the most important destination for foreign direct investment anywhere in the world. It has large foreign exchange reserves that not allow it to make big investments in other countries. China's accession to the WTO in 2001 has been a further step in its opening to the outside world. The country plans to deepen its integration into the world's economy and shape the future of the world economic order. While the Chinese economy has improved dramatically, not everyone in China has received the benefits of the reforms. Unemployment has risen in China with nearly 100 million people looking for jobs. Female employment and conditions of work are as bad as in Europe of the 18th and 19th centuries. Environmental degradation and corruption have increased besides a rise in economic inequality between rural and urban residents and coastal and inland provinces. However, regionally and globally, China has become an economic power to reckon with. The integration of Chinese economy and the interdependencies that this has created has enabled China to have considerable influence with its trade partners. Hence, its outstanding issues with Japan, the US, ASEAN and Russia have been tempered by economic considerations. It hopes to resolve its differences with Taiwan, which is regarded as a renegade province, by integrating it closely into its economy. Fears of China's rise have also been mitigated by its contribution to the stability of Asian economies after the 1997 financial crisis. Its more looking investment and aid policies in Latin America and Africa are increasingly projecting it as a global player on the side of developing countries. India-China relations. India and China were great power in Asia before the advent of Western imperialism. China had considerable influence and control on the periphery of its border based on its unique tributary system. At different times in China's long history of dynastic rule, Mongolia, Korea, parts of Indochina and Tibet accepted China's authority. Various kingdoms and empires in India also extended their influence beyond the borders. In both cases, this influence was political, economic and cultural. However, the regions where India and China exercised influence rarely ever overlapped. Thus, there was limited political and cultural interaction between the two. The result was that neither country was very familiar with the other. In the 20th century, where both nations confronted each other, they had some difficulty evolving a foreign policy to deal with each other. After India regained its independence from Britain and China expelled the foreign powers, there was hope that both would come together to shape the future of the developing world and of Asia particularly. For a brief, while the slogan of Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai was popular. However, military conflict over a border dispute between the two countries marred that hope. Soon after independence, both states were involved in difference arising from the Chinese takeover of the Tibet in 1950 and the final settlement of Sino-Indian border. China and India were involved in 1962 over competing territorial claims principally in Arunachal Pradesh and in the Aksai Chin region of Ladakh. The conflict of 1962, in which India suffered military reserves, had long-term implications for India-China relations. Diplomatic relations between the two countries were downgraded until 1976. Thereafter, relations between the two countries began to improve slowly. After the change in China's political leadership from the mid to late 1970s, China's policy became more pragmatic and less ideological. So it was prepared to put off the settlement of contentious issues while improving relations with India. A series of talks to resolve the border issue were also initiated in 1981. Since the end of the Cold War, there has been significant changes in India-China relations. The relations now have a strategic as well as economic dimension. Both view themselves as rising powers in global politics, and both would like to play a major role in the Asian economy and politics. Rajiv Gandhi's visit to China in December 1988 provided the impetus for an improvement in India-China relations. Since then, both governments have taken measures to contain conflict and maintain peace and tranquility on the border. They have also signed agreements on cultural exchanges and cooperation in science and technology and open for border posts for trade. With India-China trading growing 30% per year since 1999, a more positive perspective on relations with China has emerged. Bilateral trade between India and China has increased from $338 million in 1992 to more than $18 billion in 2006 to $77.67 billion in 2020. More recently, both countries have agreed to cooperate with each other in areas that could otherwise create conflict between the two, such as bidding for energy deals abroad. At the global level, India and China have adopted similar policies in international economic institutions like the World Trade Organization. India's nuclear tests in 1998, sometimes justified on the grounds of a threat from China, did not stop greater interaction. It is true that China was seen as contributing to the build-up of Pakistan's nuclear program. China's military relations with Bangladesh and Myanmar were viewed as hostile to Indian interests in South Asia. However, none of these issues is likely to lead to conflict between the two. One sign of this is that the talks to resolve the boundary question have continued without interruption, and military-to-military cooperation is increasing. India and Chinese leaders and officials visit Beijing and New Delhi with greater frequency, and both sides are now becoming more familiar with each other. Increasing transportation and communication links, common economic interests, and global concerns should help establish a more positive and sound relationship between the two most populous countries of the world. But recent skirmishes by China have created serious issues on the border front. Since the 2020 India-China border skirmish, India-China relations have taken a great step, and in no situation India is going to compromise on its sovereignty terms. Indian government have refused to accept any kind of help from China during the outbreak of April 2021 Chinese virus. Now let's see some flashpoints between India and China. So major flashpoints between India and China are the border disputes, the border incursions, then Tibet, then China's string of pearls, water dispute, and trade imbalance. So this was all about the growing regional powers to counter US hegemony. So the study material will be uploaded on the channel. This was all. Thank you. Have a great day.